Hello everyone, we are on the VPC dashboard and let us click on create new VPC to create a new VPC. So we have the option of choosing just the VPC or VPC and more to include the public subnet or private subnet and NAT gateway and also the VPC endpoint. Let us give the name as S3 VPC endpoint 1 and let us choose the availability zone as 1 and let us choose 0 public subnets and we are not going with the NAT gateway and also let us choose the private subnet as 1. So we have an option to either create the VPC endpoint during the creation of the VPC. Since we are the way we have a S3 bucket that the Lambda function will be trying to access through the private subnet, let us choose S3 gateway. If not, we can choose none, but we'll have to go back to the VPC endpoint in the options on the console and create a VPC endpoint separately. And after, also we have to enable the DNS host names and resolution and create VPC. So this will create a new VPC as well as a private subnet and VPC endpoint for accessing the S3 bucket. Now let us go back to Lambda function and create a new function called S3 access function. Let us give the runtime as Python 3.9. Let us choose an existing role that was already created and let us enable the VPC. Let us choose the VPC that we just created, which is S3 VPC endpoint 1 and let us choose the private subnet that was created as well as security group is a default security group which will allow the traffic from Lambda function to other resources in the VPC. Let us update the code for the Lambda function so to access the S3 bucket. So now that the Lambda function successfully got created, let us update the Lambda function code. So this code will try to access an S3 bucket that's located in the same account in a different account. It's outside of the VPC and it will try to access the S3 bucket. So the bucket name is sample VPC 11, so which is already created and if you see there are no specific permissions to this Lambda to this S3 bucket. So let us try to run the Lambda function and see if it successfully tries to access the S3 bucket. So if we see the response is 200, so that does mean that the Lambda function is trying to access the S3 bucket which is outside of the VPC to the VPC endpoint. So to just verify this, we'll try to remove the VPC endpoint and see if the Lambda function now will try to access the S3 bucket or not. For that, let us go back to the VPC that just got created and the endpoint that was created with this VPC endpoint VPC. So this is the VPC endpoint that was created and let us delete this VPC and now verify if the Lambda function still can access the S3 bucket or not. So we now see that there's a timeout error. So the reason or the root cause for timeout error is usually because of the access issue inside the VPC. So once we add a new VPC endpoint for the S3, this should resolve the issue. So now let us go to the console, and in these VPC endpoints, let us create a VPC endpoint. Let us give it a name as S3 endpoint 12. Let us choose the service as S3 and the gateway type is the gateway. Let's choose the VPC. So the VPC that we created was S3 VPC Endpoint 1, and let us choose the private subnet as a root table, and click on create endpoint. Now that the endpoint's created, let us go back to the Lambda function and test the Lambda function. So this has now resolved the timeout issue, and it tried successfully access the S3 bucket. So additionally, let us also go check the IAM role that was assigned to the Lambda function. It is very important to know that the permissions that it has. So going to configuration. So IAM role that was attached to this is demo role, and it has the full access, which is S3, which would allow the Lambda function to access the S3 bucket as well. If you remove this specific policy, it will also give a timeout error. Let us also see how we can create a flow log for VPC. Under the VPC dashboard and the VPC, we have the option to choose flow logs and create flow log. This will create, let us give the name as my flow log 1. Let us choose the destination as the CloudWatch log, so that all the logs appear in the all the logs for this specific AWS resource will be pushed to the CloudWatch logs. So let us give the destination as VPC FlowLog 1, and the IAM role, which was already created, and with the necessary permissions, let us choose FlowLog role 2. Let us click create FlowLog. So we just triggered a event in the Lambda function, and we can see that there's a new log that appeared in the log stream. So this is how it looks like in the CloudWatch log.